Corporal Mason Hale had always imagined his final moments would be something noble, or at least something he could brag about in the afterlife. Instead, he lay face up in alien dirt, while a 12-foot silver being poked his leg like it was trying to decide if humans were ripe when squishy. The hook of his life and death played out with tragic absurdity as he tried to breathe, heard the aliens whispering urgently in tones far too gentle for a battlefield, and thought, of all ridiculous things, that he really should have worn cleaner socks. Then came the final twist of the universe, the kind reserved for dramatic Hollywoods and poorly timed jokes, because as the aliens leaned close, he whispered what would doom or save a future he would not get to witness. Send more soldiers. He said it because they begged him. Humanity heard it as a challenge. And somewhere between his last breath and his last thought, Mason realized the universe had finally played him like a cosmic prank. Before that moment, the battlefield had felt wrong in ways Mason could not articulate. The ground shimmered with faint blue light, like bioluminescent moss woven into the soil. The air shifted with strange metallic ripples, humming in and out of existence, as if physics itself hiccuped every few seconds. His squad had called it the Glitch Field, a name both dramatic and lazy, which was exactly how soldiers named things. Mason had been running through it only minutes earlier, dodging bursts of energy fire that looked suspiciously like angry disco lights. He had been hit by one of them, a searing flash that tore through his armor and knocked him into a crater that smelled faintly of burnt cinnamon. Now he lay there, unable to move anything except his mouth, which was inconvenient because everything he needed to say required arms, legs, and a working spine. Above him, the tall silver figure stood in a ring, their luminous white eyes filled with something he never expected from alien invaders. Worry. They leaned in, their faces smooth and expressionless, yet their voices trembled with urgency as they spoke in melodic tones he could somehow understand. This was absurd, he thought. No training manual covered the moment when aliens tried to apologize for shooting you by accident. One of them lifted a hand, elegant and unnervingly long-fingered, touching the wound on Mason's side. A warm pulse spread through him, like being hugged by a microwave. His pain dulled, but the exhaustion remained, heavy as the planet itself. The alien spoke again, forming a message so desperate and sincere that Mason's rational mind tried to reject it. They were not attacking Earth. They were not invading. They were fleeing something far worse than humans could imagine, and they needed help. Not soldiers, not guns, but aid. Protection. Diplomacy. Mason wanted to laugh. He wanted to tell them that humans barely managed to negotiate a schedule for laundry facilities, let alone galactic refugee crises. But then the alien pressed something softly against his chest. A glowing square. A translation device. Mason heard their message clearly. Help us. Bring your leaders. Bring your peacemakers. Bring anyone who can stop what is coming. His lungs burned. His throat tightened. His vision narrowed until all he could see were those luminous eyes pleading with him. He realized they weren't surrounding him to finish him off. They were trying to keep him alive long enough to deliver a message. His helmet's communication system crackled weakly. Command's voice broke through, distorted by static and the ambient interference of the glitch field. Hale, report status. Hale, do you copy? His lips trembled as he tried to repeat what the aliens wanted. Bring more helpers. Bring diplomats. Bring people who know how to negotiate. But the words came out ragged, shaped by the weight of death pressing down on him. The aliens leaned in closer, urging him. Send them. Send someone. Send more. Mason inhaled one last painful breath and pushed the words out. Send more soldiers. His voice faded on the final syllable. And there it was, the perfect tragic irony. He died hoping the message would save lives. Humanity heard a call to arms. Back on Earth, chaos erupted within minutes. The command center erupted in frantic energy as his fragmented transmission replayed over and over, cutting off after the sudden static spike that indicated the moment his suit shut down. General Rowan slammed a hand on the table, declaring the situation catastrophic and requiring immediate reinforcements. The analysts tried to isolate the meaning of the glitch distortion, but the politicians already wanted a heroic narrative more than clarity. A particularly loud senator insisted Mason had died an icon, calling for backup while surrounded by inhuman monsters. A scientist pointed out that the audio had strange harmonic undertones not consistent with typical battle recordings, but no one listened. A junior technician tried to point out that the word soldiers might have been part of a larger sentence, considering the abrupt cutoff. He was ignored so thoroughly he considered stapling his own report to the general's forehead. Preparations began immediately. The reinforcement team was assembled from a pool of available personnel, and by available, the system meant everyone not smart enough or lucky enough to avoid eye contact in the hallway. The first chosen was Lieutenant Zara King, a strict rule follower whose idea of relaxation was reorganizing mislabeled supply crates by alphabetical trauma impact probability. Next came Dr. Felix Ward, a conspiracy theorist in a lab coat who believed aliens had been sending messages through office vending machine patterns for years. Lastly, for reasons no one could fully explain even to themselves, Private Pete Peanut Grimes was selected, a rookie so unqualified he once failed a shooting test by accidentally firing at his own shadow. Together they formed a team that no sane person would send into a dangerous battlefield, which made them perfect for this mission. As they boarded the drop ship, the tension felt thick enough to slice with a ration knife. Zara reviewed mission protocols with military precision. Felix insisted on scanning the ship for invisible spy microbes. Peanut pressed every blinking button he could reach until Zara slapped his hand away. None of them knew Mason's real message. None of them knew what awaited them. None of them knew the universe was about to take one soldier's dying whisper and twist it into a chain reaction that would change every world it touched. And miles away, Mason Hale's lifeless hand slipped from the glowing alien device as the silver beings lowered their heads in mourning, hoping humanity had heard the plea for peace rather than the drumbeat for war. The drop ship thundered through the atmosphere of the alien planet with all the grace of a refrigerator falling down a stairwell. Lieutenant Zara King held on to the safety rails so tightly her knuckles looked polished. Dr. Felix Ward muttered something about gravitational anomalies conspiring to flip them inside out. And Peanut Grimes, whose nickname perfectly matched the size of his brain under pressure, giggled nervously every time the ship rattled. When the turbulence increased so violently that the entire cabin lurched, Peanut tapped a glowing button near his seat and asked if it was supposed to be blinking red. In the next instant the ship jerked sideways with a sound that suggested the universe was cracking its knuckles in preparation for hurting them. Zara screamed at him to remove his finger from anything that blinked, shined, buzzed, or otherwise demanded attention. Peanut promptly removed his hand, causing yet another violent jolt that blew out 3 overhead lights. Felix's theory that alien interference was sabotaging them suddenly seemed less like a conspiracy and more like a polite understatement. They were supposed to land at a specific coordinate marked as previous contact point, but instead the drop ship tore through a cluster of floating crystal formations, ricocheted off a cliff that hummed menacingly, spun twice, and slammed into a patch of multicolored vegetation that hissed as if offended. When the doors hissed open, not by design but by giving up the will to stay attached, the 3 tumbled out into a landscape so strange that even Felix stopped muttering long enough to stare. The sky had 2 suns, both pulsing with faint rings as if they were breathing. The ground glowed in sections, not consistently, but in flickers like a broken neon sign. Strange plants curled and uncurled themselves, whispering faintly. Peanut stepped on one, and it squeaked as though rudely awakened. Zara forced herself into command mode, adjusting her gear despite half of it hanging at suspicious angles from their chaotic landing. She ordered everyone to stay sharp and maintain formation. Peanut immediately tripped over his own bootlace, falling face first into a patch of glowing vines. The vines reacted by puffing a cloud of sparkling dust directly into his face. Peanut sneezed so violently the vines recoiled, and a group of nearby creatures shrieked and scattered in terror. They were small, mossy beings with long ears and bulbous eyes. They had been watching the humans cautiously until Peanut's sneeze convinced them humans were capable of explosive biological warfare. Zara glared at Peanut with enough intensity to melt armor, but Peanut swore it was not his fault his allergies reacted to alien pollen. Felix crouched beside the vines, analyzing the dust particles with a handheld scanner he claimed he built himself using household appliances and 2 microwave parts. He theorized that the creatures believed sneezes were sonic detonations, which made Peanut the most terrifying thing on the planet at the moment. Peanut preened proudly at the accidental intimidation, although Zara reminded him he could barely intimidate a pillow back home. As they moved deeper into the wilderness, the terrain became stranger. The ground shifted in gradients of color like a mood ring reacting to their footsteps. The wind carried faint melodic tones, almost as if the planet itself sang softly. Felix was ecstatic, declaring the place a living biosymphony. Zara ignored him, focusing on finding Mason's last known location and identifying potential threats. She was disciplined, but even she could not ignore the unsettling feeling that eyes watched them from every direction. Eventually they approached a ridge where the soil turned dark and granular. It reminded them too much of the battlefield footage they reviewed before the mission. Scorch marks, jagged craters, and broken alien structures littered the area. Zara knelt to examine the ground and found something half-buried. She brushed away the dust and froze. It was a human handprint. Not just any handprint. A fresh one. Mason Hale's. Felix leaned over her shoulder, fascinated. The imprint was accompanied by strange patterns that were not caused by humans. They were delicate spirals and loops, similar to the markings the silver aliens used. This was not just a footprint. It was a message, a marker placed intentionally. Peanut stared in awe, as though expecting the handprint to crawl away. Zara realized they were following a trail, not a random battlefield. Before they could investigate further, a group of alien creatures emerged at the ridge. They were taller than the mossy creatures and carried staffs that glowed with bright energy. These aliens were clearly more advanced and more cautious. Their silver skin shimmered like liquid metal, and their eyes shone with intense curiosity. They approached the humans with slow, deliberate steps. Zara raised her weapon, warning them to stop. Felix yelled for her not to shoot anything important. Peanut sneezed again, causing the aliens to flinch and brace themselves defensively. The misunderstanding escalated rapidly when one alien pointed its staff at Peanut's nose, trying to determine if it would explode again. Peanut waved his hands frantically, insisting he could not control it. Felix stepped between them, babbling in what he believed was their tonal language, though it sounded more like a malfunctioning flute. The aliens cocked their heads, confused and mildly horrified. Zara was seconds away from declaring a tactical retreat when one of the aliens abruptly reached out and touched her wrist. A soft warmth spread from its fingertips, and a series of images flashed in her mind. She saw Mason alive, encased in a glowing structure. She saw him struggling to speak. She saw the silver aliens surrounding him not as enemies but as protectors. Then she saw something else, something dark and mechanical with countless shifting parts consuming everything in its path. Zara staggered back, gasping. Felix steadied her while Peanut attempted to mime concern, though it looked more like he was wrestling an invisible penguin. The alien who touched Zara backed away respectfully, indicating for them to follow. Felix insisted they were being invited to see something important, possibly Mason himself. Zara hesitated, weighing caution against the undeniable urgency in the aliens' movements. They were not behaving like enemies. They seemed desperate. The teen followed the aliens through winding paths, avoiding glowing craters and humming rock formations until they reached a large canyon. At the bottom was a vast glowing field, shimmering with energy waves that pulsed rhythmically. Zara felt her breath catch when she saw a familiar figure lying inside a transparent cocoon structure. It was Mason Hale. He was alive. The aliens stepped aside, giving the humans a clear view of him. His eyes were open, weak but aware. He tried to sit up but seemed restrained by the structure itself. Zara felt a rare flicker of shock break through her rigid composure. Felix whispered something excitedly. Peanut gasped loudly and dropped his backpack, startling everyone, including Mason. Seeing Mason alive was not just a miracle. It was a sign that everything they believed about this mission might be profoundly wrong. They were not walking into an alien war zone. They were walking into an alien plea for help, and humanity had completely misunderstood the call. Mason Hale had always been too stubborn to die quietly, and the sight of him conscious inside the glowing cocoon only confirmed that death had once again found him too annoying to claim. His eyes blinked open slowly as the team approached, adjusting to the layered glow surrounding him. The cocoon looked delicate, but the shimmering structure hummed with power strong enough to rattle the air. Zara stepped forward cautiously, her training screaming at her to assess, analyze, and absolutely not touch anything that looked like it contained a half-alive soldier cooked sous vide style. Felix, meanwhile, stared in awe like a child discovering a new type of candy. Peanut waved enthusiastically, forgetting entirely that Mason had no idea who he was. Mason tried to speak, but the cocoon vibrated and suppressed the movement, as if insisting he wait his turn. The alien who had guided them here approached and placed its hand on the surface of the cocoon. The shimmering dimmed briefly, and Mason exhaled shakily. His voice cracked as it came out, barely more than a whisper, yet filled with sarcasm even while dangling on the edge of survival. "Took you long enough." Peanut gasped in joy and replied with complete sincerity that they had crashed 3 times on the way and also gotten lost, and then Zara smacked his arm to make him stop talking. As the cocoon deactivated layer by layer, Mason winced but managed to sit up. He looked thinner, paler, and exhausted, with burns along his side partially healed by alien technology. Zara knelt beside him, assessing his condition. She expected confusion or trauma in his eyes. Instead, she saw something more unsettling. Determination mixed with fear, the kind soldiers only carried when they had seen something far beyond human comprehension. Mason tried to stand but nearly collapsed. Zara caught his shoulder and forced him to sit. He muttered that the aliens had been trying to help him, not hurt him, and Felix practically levitated with excitement at the confirmation. The aliens stepped forward in a semicircle, their expressions unreadable but their posture gentle. One raised a hand toward Mason, and he nodded weakly. A soft light expanded from the alien and formed a 3-dimensional pattern above them. Strange symbols, swirling images, and fragments of memories lit up the air. A visual language built from color and movement. Felix whispered that it was communication technology far beyond anything on Earth. Peanut whispered that his brain hurt. Zara whispered nothing at all, but her eyes narrowed as she watched every detail. The images changed, showing the aliens traveling through space on elegant ships before a shadow overtook them. Not a creature but a consuming force. A mechanical swarm with shifting metallic forms that absorbed everything in its path, leaving behind nothing but dead gray husks of planets. The Null Swarm. Mason had seen pieces of it in visions the aliens shared with him, while he lay hovering between life and death. He tried to explain that the aliens had not attacked Earth first. They had been fleeing, desperate for sanctuary, and the battlefield where humans arrived was actually the remnants of a stand against the swarm. The alien light show sent a cold wave through the team as they realized they had arrived not in the aftermath of an invasion, but in the aftermath of a massacre. Zara clenched her jaw, conflicted. Mason insisted that his final message had been misunderstood. He tried to say send more help, but the pain, the distortion, and the urgency had twisted his voice. Felix nodded vigorously, saying the audio patterns had suggested partial harmonic interference. Zara stared at Mason, her disciplined mind wrestling with the implications. Her training had taught her to distrust the unknown, and nothing was more unknown than a species capable of resurrecting a near-dead soldier in a glowing alien pod. Peanut slowly stepped closer to Mason and asked if he needed a snack, because he had brought 8 protein bars and 3 packs of dehydrated pudding. Mason stared at him as though questioning whether he was hallucinating. Felix pointed out that Peanut's concern, however misplaced, demonstrated that humans were not naturally aggressive unless provoked or sneezing in fear. The aliens tilted their heads, still unsure of Peanut's unpredictable noises. Mason motioned Zara closer and spoke with a rasp. They were trying to protect me. They were trying to give me time to send a real message. Something is coming. Something bigger than this planet, bigger than us. Zara held his gaze, searching for deception and finding none. She felt the pressure of command bearing down on her. Her mission parameters had crumbled the moment they realized Mason survived and the aliens were not hostile. but admitting that meant everything back home was operating under a false assumption. Reinforcements might be on the way, expecting a war instead of a plea for alliance. The alien who had guided them earlier tapped the ground with its staff, and the energy field beneath them changed. A circular platform of light emerged, rising slowly. The alien gestured toward it, indicating they were being invited deeper into the alien refuge. Felix bounced excitedly toward it, mumbling predictions about ancient knowledge and galactic diplomacy. Peanut hesitated until Mason assured him the aliens were safe. Zara finally relented, helping Mason stand and supporting his weight as they stepped onto the platform. The platform sank, transporting them below the canyon floor into a vast chamber that stretched beyond sight. Biomechanical structures intertwined with living roots, glowing softly. The air hummed with energy, and gigantic orbs floated overhead like suspended suns. Zara felt a strange mixture of awe and discomfort. Everything here breathed with a rhythm that was both organic and technological. Mason explained that the aliens had tried to tell him the swarm followed patterns, moving like a predatory algorithm through the galaxy. The refugees were the last of their species, and they believed humans were capable of resisting the swarm because humanity was unpredictable, chaotic, and illogical. Felix grinned proudly at that description. Peanut nodded enthusiastically as if being unpredictable was a compliment he had been training for his entire life. Zara listened, her skepticism crumbling under the weight of evidence. The aliens were not preparing for conquest. They were preparing for extinction. One alien stepped behind Mason and projected another image into the air. It showed a looming shape drifting in the darkness of space, jagged and shifting, its body made of millions of mechanical shards. The swarm. Felix gulped loudly. Peanut hid behind Mason despite Mason barely being able to stand. Zara finally spoke. If everything Mason said was true, if the aliens were victims and not enemies, then Earth needed to know. Humanity needed to prepare. She looked at the alien leader and asked, in a calm but commanding voice, what they expected from her team. The alien approached, raised a hand, and shared a final sequence of images. Unity. Cooperation. Defense. Hope. Then, buried deeper in the message, a warning. The swarm had detected them. Mason exhaled shakily, realizing what came next. This mission was no longer a rescue. It was a race against annihilation. The warning vibrated through the chamber like a pulse from the planet's core, a tremor so deep that even the floating orbs above flickered. For a moment, the entire team stood frozen. Zara felt the air around them thicken, tightening like a fist. Felix stared upward in horror as symbols rippled across the alien structures, cascading warnings that did not require translation to be understood. Peanut clutched his backpack straps so hard he nearly ripped them, while Mason, still barely standing, looked as though he had returned to the moment he first saw the threat that had driven the aliens into hiding. The swarm was no longer a distant fear. It was close enough to disturb the planet's energy systems. The aliens moved rapidly, their steps soundless yet urgent. The chamber transformed from a quiet sanctuary into a mobilization ground within seconds. Panels slid open along the walls, revealing glowing conduits and crystalline devices that pulsed like metallic hearts. Zara immediately fell into a defensive mindset, scanning every entry point and calculating potential combat strategies. Felix was already muttering about electromagnetic anomalies, scanning the rippling patterns above them. Peanut simply whispered repeatedly that he did not want to die on a planet that smelled like glowing vegetables. A deep reverberating boom echoed overhead, sending dust cascading from the ceiling. Zara grabbed Mason to steady him as a second tremor rattled through the floor. The aliens projected a large image into the center of the chamber. It showed the sky above the canyon splitting open in a distorted ripple, as if reality itself were being peeled back. Then the shape appeared, a jagged, shifting mass like a storm made of metal shards and pulsing red eyes. The Null Swarm. Mason swallowed hard, his voice shaking as he explained what he had seen during his half-conscious visions. The swarm did not communicate. It consumed. It moved like a living machine learning from every encounter. And now it had found this planet. The aliens rushed to assemble defensive structures, forming barriers of energy that arch like luminous ribs around the chamber. Zara demanded to know if these barriers could hold the swarm, but the alien leader shook its head slowly. The walls were not built to withstand full assault. They were built to hide, not to fight. The realization stung. These beings, who had saved Mason and sought peace, had never been warriors. They were scholars and travelers who had been hunted to the brink of extinction. Zara looked at Mason, who forced himself upright despite the pain. He said they needed to work together. Humans were fighters. Aliens had advanced technology. And Peanut, for reasons none of them could fully explain, was surprisingly resistant to panic in the middle of imminent death. Felix suddenly jumped back from a glowing console, shouting that he had discovered something amazing, terrible, brilliant, and most likely explosive. He explained that the swarm detected energy signatures, especially active ones. The alien cocoon systems, the healing structures, and the underground chamber itself were broadcasting signals like neon signs. They needed to disrupt the energy patterns, but the aliens explained that doing so would deactivate critical life support and leave the chamber defenseless. Zara paced, thinking rapidly. Mason leaned against the glowing structure, breathing through gritted teeth, insisting that a partial disruption might work. Peanut suggested unplugging everything like a giant cosmic reset button. Felix paused mid-rant and looked at Peanut as if he had just discovered a new element. Sometimes simple ideas were brilliant. A deep warbling cry echoed from above, shaking the air. The swarm was descending. The image projection showed dark metallic shapes slicing through the sky, sending shockwaves that shattered small hills and vaporized floating crystal formations. The aliens recoiled, their fear palpable. Zara snapped into action, barking orders that her team followed because doing anything else would have resulted in instant meltdown. Felix scrambled to reroute alien conduits, muttering equations between panicked breaths. Peanut assisted by holding cables, tools, and sometimes Felix himself, when he nearly fell over. Mason dragged himself to the center of the room, determined to help despite everyone telling him to sit down. The alien leader joined him, placing a hand on his shoulder and projecting a soft pulse of stabilizing energy. Mason nodded, bracing himself for what came next. Felix finally shouted that the system was ready for a controlled energy disruption. Zara signaled the aliens to prepare. But just as Felix pulled the primary lever, Peanut sneezed with explosive force, startling everyone. His elbow smacked into Felix, which caused Felix to yank the wrong connector. The chamber flickered violently, the lights flaring bright enough to blind them momentarily. Felix screamed about the entire system overloading. Peanut apologized repeatedly while flailing to fix whatever his sneeze had cursed. Mason, despite the chaos, let out a breathy laugh. Typical. The floor vibrated as something massive landed above. A shadow passed across the projection. Then they heard it, the scraping, churning sound of millions of metallic shards grinding together. The swarm had reached the canyon. Zara shouted for the aliens to activate the secondary defense field. A shimmering dome of energy rose above the chamber, but cracks formed almost instantly as dark shapes pounded the surface. Felix screamed that they were out of time. Mason pushed himself forward and grabbed a loose energy conduit, yelling at Felix to reverse the power flow manually. Felix argued that reversing it could cause a massive feedback explosion. Mason argued that not reversing it would cause a swarm-induced annihilation. Zara took the conduit, slammed it into the correct slot, and ordered Felix to activate the sequence. A surge of energy burst through the chamber like a giant breath being forcibly exhaled. The lights dimmed. The walls darkened. The entire underground structure powered down to near invisibility. And above them, the swarm paused. It drifted, scanning the canyon for the energy signature it had been chasing. Silence descended, interrupted only by faint grinding noises as the swarm recalibrated. The aliens held their breath. Felix held both his breath and two cables that sparked ominously. Peanut held his backpack like a shield. Mason clutched the energy conduit, praying the disruption would work. For one long moment, it seemed the swarm might move on. Then a thin metallic tendril pierced through the canyon floor, stabbing downward toward the hidden chamber. The swarm had found them anyway. The moment the metallic tendril punched through the canyon floor, the chamber erupted in panic. Sparks rained down from the ceiling as the ground trembled under the weight of the swarm pressing in. The aliens scattered, forming protective circles and projecting barriers that flickered violently under the strain. Zara grabbed Peanut and yanked him out of the tendril's path as it sliced through the floor like a blade carving through soft clay. Felix shouted warnings about structural instability, while Mason, still half supported by alien energy, tried to stand tall but nearly collapsed again. The tendril retracted for a second, as if tasting the air, then multiplied into a cluster of writhing metallic limbs probing for entry points. Zara's pulse hammered in her ears. They had seconds before the swarm broke through. The alien leader moved forward and sent out a wave of light, projecting an urgent message into the minds of each human. It showed a secret chamber deeper below, containing something powerful, something the swarm was desperate to reach. Zara staggered from the intensity of the vision. She saw images of destroyed planets, entire civilizations consumed, and the same chamber appearing on each world like a final sanctuary. It became painfully clear that the aliens were carrying more than fear. They held knowledge, technology, a last remnant of hope that the swarm sought to erase forever. Mason looked at the metallic limbs descending again, and whispered that the swarm was not just hunting the aliens. It was hunting their legacy. The ground shook again as another tendril pierced the barrier, cracking it open. Felix grabbed two portable conduits and began connecting them backward, sideways, and in every direction that made Zara's brain hurt. He claimed it was an improvisational defense system, but it looked more like he was praying to the gods of unstable engineering. Peanut knelt beside him, holding wires, tools, and occasionally his own head when sparks flew. Zara barked orders for everyone to fall back to the secondary level. The aliens responded instantly, guiding the humans through a narrow passage that sealed behind them as soon as they passed. The ceiling door rippled with light before going dark, as though exhausted from the effort. The tunnel they entered twisted downward in a spiral. The air grew colder, filled with a faint harmonic vibration that felt like walking through the inside of a living instrument. Mason staggered, leaning on Zara as he breathed out explanations. The aliens had hidden their last great archive here, a core containing uncorrupted data, advanced technology, and a proto-defensive system the swarm had never managed to destroy. It was the equivalent of a final weapon and a final library combined. If it fell, everything the aliens once were would be erased. Zara processed this with tightening resolve. Humanity had misunderstood the message, misunderstood the threat, misunderstood the purpose of this mission. But here, deep beneath the glowing planet's surface, she finally understood the role they had been thrown into. Felix's scanner beeped violently. The swarm tendrils were spreading, mapping their location through vibration patterns. They could not outrun it for long. They reached the bottom of the spiral chamber where a colossal sphere hovered, rotating slowly. The surface of the sphere was covered in shifting glyphs, like a living encyclopedia meant to speak across galaxies. At its base sat an interface platform, pulsing faintly. The alien leader placed its hand on the platform and the sphere brightened, illuminating the chamber in soft waves. Zara asked what they needed to do, though part of her feared the answer. The alien projected images into her mind. The sphere required activation to shield itself, something only possible with dual resonance input. Their species alone was not enough. They needed an external mind, someone who had already been partially imprinted by their technology. Everyone looked immediately at Mason. He groaned, muttering something about how he was not emotionally prepared to bond with a giant glowing ancient data egg today. The alien leader reassured him gently through another vision. Mason had already survived the cocoon's interface. His neural signature matched the requirements. Zara knelt beside him, gripping his shoulder. She told him he had already endured worse and, unfortunately for him, the universe had apparently decided he was important. Before they could begin the activation, another violent tremor shook the room. The metallic tendrils pierced the upper walls, tearing through the spiral passage. The screeching sound of metal grinding against living stone echoed through the chamber. Felix screamed incoherently at the sky, perhaps scolding the swarm, perhaps scolding fate. Peanut fumbled through his backpack and pulled out something he believed would help. Zara expected a weapon. Felix expected a tool. Mason hoped for a miracle. Instead, Peanut held up his lunchbox. His ridiculous metal lunchbox with stickers peeling off and dents from every clumsy step he ever took. Felix stared at it, jaw-dropping. The lunchbox was made of an alloy accidentally created in a manufacturing defect, one Peanut had bragged about because it survived a microwave explosion. Felix scanned it and gasped that it absorbed radiation signatures, masking energy output. It could shield Mason and the alien core during activation. Peanut beamed proudly, as though he had just become a superhero by accident. Zara took the lunchbox, handed it to Mason, and ordered him to get into position. Felix helped rig the lunchbox onto the platform, turning it into a makeshift stabilizer. Mason approached the sphere, his breathing ragged. He pressed his hands onto the glowing surface. The sphere responded immediately. Glyphs spun faster, light intensified, and energy surged through Mason like a tidal wave of thought. He clenched his teeth, experiencing flashes of alien history, emotions, memories, sorrows, and hopes that were not his but were now flowing through him. The swarm crashed into the lower chamber ceiling, sending shards flying. Felix rushed to activate a temporary shield. Peanut threw himself in front of Mason protectively, holding a metal tool in front of him like a heroic butter knife. Zara fired at approaching tendrils, each shot buying them precious seconds. The alien leader joined Mason, placing its hand on the sphere. Together, human and alien formed the resonance needed. The chamber flooded with light. The sphere activated fully. A wave of energy blasted outward in a perfect circle, vaporizing the invading tendrils and sending the swarm recoiling. The shockwave ascended the spiral tunnel, bursting through the canyon floor like a pillar of glowing force. Outside, the swarm staggered, its form glitching, destabilized by the activation. Zara stared as the last fragments of invading metal crumbled into dust. When the light faded, Mason collapsed. The alien leader caught him gently. The sphere dimmed, entering a dormant but protected state. The swarm was not destroyed, but the core was safe, and the activation had delivered a critical blow. Zara knelt beside Mason, her expression softening. Felix exhaled, trembling. Peanut hugged his backpack, whispering never again to glowing vegetables or metal monsters. But deep in the distance, a faint metallic hum lingered. The swarm had retreated. And it was preparing to return stronger than before. The aftermath of the activation left the chamber trembling like a living creature catching its breath. The glowing sphere pulsed weakly, its energy signatures stabilizing but fragile. Mason lay unconscious but alive, the alien leader kneeling beside him, while Zara, Felix, and Peanut formed a protective triangle around them. The air remained heavy with the scent of scorched metal and ozone. Though the invading tendrils had been obliterated, the echoes of the swarm's retreating hum reverberated through the stone walls like a sinister promise. Zara felt the weight of the silence press against her ribs. They had survived the first assault, but it was painfully clear that they had only delayed the inevitable. The swarm had not been defeated. It had been wounded. And predators often returned fiercer after tasting resistance. The alien leader projected a weak vision into the room, showing the sky above. Swarm fragments regrouped in orbit, forming ominous spirals that shimmered with mechanical life. They were recalibrating, adapting, preparing to strike again with greater force. Zara steadied her breathing. There was no time to rest, no time to rethink the mission. They needed a plan, and they needed one now. Felix ran a shaky hand through his hair while scanning the symbols flickering along the sphere's surface. He muttered to himself about energy spikes, electromagnetic pulses, and the terrifying possibility that the swarm had learned from the first blast. Peanut stood nearby clutching his dented lunchbox, watching Felix struggle and offering the occasional encouraging nod. It was clear he did not understand the science, but he understood their desperation. Mason stirred, drawing everyone's attention. His eyelids fluttered, and he whispered something unintelligible at first. Zara leaned close, urging him to focus. His words came clearer, speaking of echoes left in his mind from the sphere's activation. The alien memories had shown him something important. The swarm had a central command node, a core buried within its shifting mass. If they struck that central node with enough force, the entire swarm could destabilize. Felix nearly tripped over himself, both thrilled and horrified. Destroying the node required an energy surge far greater than what the sphere alone could generate. They needed a catalyst, something unpredictable enough to slip past the swarm's adaptive shielding. Zara glanced at Mason, knowing exactly what he was implying. Human unpredictability. Earth tech mixed with alien energy. Chaos engineered with precision. Felix hesitated, chewing his lip as he considered what they had available. The sphere, alien conduits, weapon packs, portable generators, and a handful of unstable components salvaged from the chamber. Nothing seemed powerful enough, until Peanut lifted his lunchbox again, hoping someone needed it. Felix stared at the lunchbox like it was an artifact forged by galactic prophets. Peanut backed up nervously, insisting it was just normal metal. Felix shook his head violently. The accidental alloy, the radiation-proof qualities, the way it absorbed energy without exploding, it was not just a lunchbox. It was the perfect containment vessel for a hypercharged energy core. Zara was not thrilled at the idea of using Peanut's beloved lunchbox as the centerpiece of a bomb capable of destabilizing a planet-sized machine hive. But as the chamber trembled again under the distant roars of the swarm, choices narrowed into inevitability. The aliens joined the effort, bringing crystalline energy rods and woven conduits. Felix constructed the unstable mechanism like a frantic artist composing a masterpiece. Peanut handed tools and snacks with equal determination, occasionally offering advice that made no sense but always delivered with heartfelt sincerity. Mason sat against the sphere, recovering strength slowly. The alien leader rested a hand on his shoulder, lending steady streams of energy. Together, they watched the chaotic invention take shape. By the time the device was complete, it hummed with a violent energy that made Zara's skin prickle. Felix explained through deep breaths that the weapon would need to be placed directly into the swarm's command node. Unfortunately, the node was not stationary. It moved within the swarm mass like a shifting heartbeat. Someone would have to get close, dangerously close, to deliver the device. Mason immediately volunteered, which earned him a fierce glare from Zara. She reminded him he could barely stand 10 minutes ago. Mason countered that he had the alien imprint in his mind, giving him a unique connection the others did not possess. Felix argued that Mason risked destabilizing mentally if exposed to swarm frequencies again. Peanut offered to go, declaring proudly that he had survived a sharp attack on his shadow once during training. Zara refused that instantly, fearing the combination of Peanut and mortal danger would end in catastrophe. They argued until another shudder tore through the chamber. The canyon overhead split, dust and debris falling like gray rain. There was no more time. Zara slammed her hand against the control panel, opening the exit path. She made the decision for them. They would all go. Mason would guide them to the node. Zara would lead the charge. Felix would stabilize the device. Peanut would carry it in the lunchbox, partly because he insisted and partly because he was surprisingly resistant to panic in situations that should have caused it. The aliens joined them, forming a protective perimeter as they rose from the underground chamber. When they emerged onto the canyon floor, the sight was overwhelming. The sky swirled with metallic clouds. The swarm descended like an immense storm made of knives and lightning. Every movement of its mass created a sound like collapsing steel. But beneath the terror, they could see it. A shifting red pulse inside the storm. The node. Mason pointed, voice hoarse but certain. They moved fast, dodging falling shards and leaping across fissures as the aliens projected shimmering barriers around them. Tendrils shot toward them, slicing through stone. Zara fired relentlessly, covering the team's advance. Peanut clutched the humming lunchbox like a sacred relic, sprinting with a determination no one expected from him. Felix stayed close, preventing the unstable energy from detonating prematurely. Mason guided them with instinctual certainty, sensing the node's movements. The alien leader moved beside him, amplifying his perception. As they neared the swirling core of the swarm, the ground vibrated violently. A massive tendril lunged toward Peanut. Zara shoved him aside, taking the full force of the impact against her armor. She stumbled but rose, fueled by raw defiance. They reached the edge of the swarm's heart. Mason shouted the signal. Peanut threw open the lunchbox, revealing the violent glow inside. Felix activated the final sequence, yelling for Peanut to throw it. Peanut, trembling but brave, hurled the lunchbox into the pulsing red core. For one suspended moment, everything fell silent. Then the world exploded. A sphere of light erupted outward, shredding through the swarm's metallic mass. The sky lit up with cascading bursts of energy as the node destabilized. The storm unraveled, collapsing like a dying star. Shards dissolved into dust, falling harmlessly through the air. The swarm roared a final metallic cry before its